and welcome to the final In Search of the Crystal Skull Christmas edition, an epic adventure into the world of mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And today we are looking at our last Christmas movie, which is The Santa Claus. It is a movie starring Tim Allen. So, the premise of this movie is that Tim Allen is someone who doesn't seem to believe all that well amongst Christmas. That is until he actually sees Santa Claus himself. The Santa Claus ends up getting startled by our character and ends up being moved off the roof. He ends up then putting on the Santa suit and taking on the role of Santa Claus, and ends up doing the job himself. He then slowly ends up finding himself that he's actually become Santa himself, and slowly starts morphing into Santa Claus to the amazement of everyone around him. Unfortunately, this gets him into a bit of trouble with the law and also with legal issues as well, as he starts to lose custody of his family in favor of taking on the more of the role and the physical form of Santa, to the point where people start believing that he's crazy, and my goodness, where have we heard that before? For of course, but yeah, I mean, so that's sort of like the basis of it, but I'm sure there's more into as we get into it. But I mean, some of you who do not know Tim Allen, I mean, anyone who's watched Toy Story, I mean, knows what Tim Allen does. So I mean, to
Yeah,
infinity
exactly.
and
He's the
beyond.
voice of Buzz Lightyear.
Exactly, yeah. So,
and also you may know him for Home Improvement if you ever grew up with that sitcom in the 90s.
Oh yeah, so I mean, Tim Allen was, a big feature in I think in the 80s and the 90s as well. He had some pretty prominent roles in, back in that time. But I think the Santa Claus, however, I mean, it's, I guess in this movie, I think there are some interesting parts, I think, to the Santa Claus, but I've got to be honest with you, it's not the definitive Christmas movie, I think, to say the least.
Yeah, even though despite a lot of people having mixed to negative reviews when this first came out in theaters, it's had 2 sequels, and currently on Disney Plus, it has a miniseries that actually has been, as of the recording of this podcast, been greenlit for a 2nd season.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with, here's the thing about some of these movies that we've seen, it seems that they seem to get, pretty bad receptions when they first come out, but then, keep this in mind, I think, wasn't the Santa Claus also, obviously it wasn't successful in theaters, but as it started getting reruns, was it successful in theaters?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, okay then. So it was successful in theaters, but then after that, it actually got released into, obviously on TV, and it was played multiple times on cable, as you can probably imagine. So, it had no choice but to kind of, garner, tons and tons of fans. So that's probably the reason why it did get all those sequels, and the reason why it's so kind of, you say, celebrated today.
Exactly, yeah. And also the concept of a guy becoming Santa and then going over to the North Pole, and what happens around 1 year after you become Santa Claus? Over time, you start having things happen to you, such as you start getting weight, you start growing a beard, you get the naughty and nice list, you find out about every single person about what they want. So it's actually interesting about this really interesting interpretation about the origins of Santa Claus, because we've seen 100 versions of this. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, Klaus, A Boy Called Christmas. So seeing a new interpretation of Santa Claus involving with just a regular guy who's a toy owner who has no interest in, doing so for the sake of others. He just wants to do it to make money. And then he becomes Santa Claus and he has to deliver toys for the good of all children. So he becomes a little bit more sentimental. He starts having an appreciation towards Christmas and about what his job is. So in terms of that, it's an interesting take on it.
Yeah. So, our cast in this movie includes Judge Reinhold, who plays Neil in this movie, and is better known for his roles in the Beverly Hills Cops movies and also Fast Times in Ridgemont High. But he plays Neil in this movie, and effectively, I think, isn't he the character who is basically now with Laura in this movie? Yeah.
Yeah. He is basically Laura's new husband because Scott Calvin and Laura had gotten divorced years prior, and now he's the new husband. And Dr. Neil Miller is a psychiatrist who doesn't believe in Santa Claus because he thinks about this in logic. It's like, how could it be that a man lives up into the North Pole and is able to deliver toys to millions of children in just one night? So he thinks about it in a logical perspective, kind of like what we talked about in Miracle on 34th Street, in which, how can it be that one man is able to be responsible for doing all this stuff in one night. I mean, is there such thing as a Santa Claus? I don't know. So we know about the fact that, because he's a psychiatrist, because he's very like sticking to the point and logic and knowing about how everything works in that kind of perspective. He doesn't believe in Santa Claus, and he doesn't believe about the tales of Charlie saying about like, oh, we went to the North Pole and my dad's the new Santa and all that kind of stuff. They think he's like playing this game with Scott, and they think that Scott is turning crazy when he starts gaining weight and getting the beard and all that kind of stuff. And that's when
Well,
they decide that
that's a reoccurring theme in the movie. That because
yes,
obviously by the way, the young kid in this movie is called Charlie. Would you believe?
yes.
And no relation to Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, as I say. He's played by
Yeah, and no relation to Charlie Brown from Charlie Brown Christmas.
yeah, and so I mean, he's played by Eric Lloyd, and by the way, I mean, like besides the Santa Claus and the Santa Claus 2, the only other notable thing that he's ever been in is Dunstan Checks In, which
Yeah, I remember that
the less we
movie.
talk about that movie, the better. But
Yeah.
yeah, and but I mean, Eric Lloyd's performance in this movie is very genuine. Like he is like a kid at Christmas time. You can believe that he has that magical whimsicalness around him, and he believes in his father. Not only like he believes in his father, but he believes the fact that he's Santa Claus as well. And everything like
Right.
that. So he's got two reasons to love him. Like not only like he's his dad, but like he's like the guy who like brings joy to like millions of children across billions of children
And
across
you
the
and
world.
it's kind of interesting because it doesn't start off that way because in the beginning of the movie he's dropped off by Scott because his mom and Neil are going out and he has to spend the remaining of Christmas with his dad and his dad doesn't know how to cook and they have to go to Denny's and so after Denny's he reads him a bedtime story about like the night before Christmas and then that's when the events happen when Santa's up on the roof and then Scott scares him off, Santa dies, and then the thing that's left over is the suit. He puts on the suit, and then he becomes the new Santa.
So, I think in regards to Eric Lloyd's performance, I mean, like again, I say that it's pretty genuine, and I think dare I say, like he's probably like one of the better kids that we've probably had in Christmas movies, probably. If I'm, am I being too?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, like, throughout this month, we've seen Mara Wilson, we saw Macaulay Culkin, and then Eric Lloyd's, and then there's also the kids from Unlikely Angels. So, yeah, I would say he was one of the better kids that we saw this month.
Yeah, exactly. So, Bernard is played by David Krumholtz, and for those of you who do not know what he does, and I'm just doing my lazy research on Wikipedia and IMDb, he's in Gigi Does It, he's in The Deuce, and Slumber Beverly Hills, and The Ballad of Blood. And this is the thing, like, some of these, some of the people who actually appeared in this movie, with the exception of Tim Allen, I mean, like, unfortunately, they didn't really go on to, like, do any better things. Unfortunately, I mean, can we actually, point at another, another actor who's like, gone on to like, oh, hey, done this amazing thing. I mean, I can't really.
I mean, I'm sure we've talked about our fair share of examples of that. Remember when we talked about in the Roald Dahl retrospective, that's pretty much like 90% of the kicked actors that played off as the main
Yeah, I mean,
protagonist.
Larry Brandenburg, who plays the detective in this movie. I mean, I guess he was one of the cops in the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So and he was in the Shawshank Redemption. So there's that. But
Sure.
yeah, so
Anyway, but yeah, Bernard is the head elf, and he's the one who explains about the Santa Claus, as in like clause with an E. And it's this really tiny set of notes that is on the original business card of Santa Claus saying that whoever puts on the suit, they become the new Santa. And he tries to explain to Scott that now that he's able to be the one who, took the place of the old Santa, he now has this responsibility of delivering all the gifts to millions of children all over the world. And, he has 1 year so that he has to prepare himself. And he all thinks this is a dream because he wakes up the next day, they're back to where they were before. And even though that he still has the same pajamas that he wore in the North Pole, there's just absolutely no way that they could actually be a part of this whole situation where he's the new Santa. And Bernard, every once in a while comes in and explains to him that this is what the situation is. And it's kind of funny because Bernard shows up in like Santa Claus 2 and in the Santa Clauses, but he does not appear in Santa Claus 3, which is interesting. But we're getting like out of topic. But yeah, so he gets introduced into all the other elves in the North Pole, and he sees how the operation works. That all the kids who work on the North Pole are basically ageless because they're elves, and they are putting together all the toys so that they can be able to get themselves ready for the next Christmas. And things at first, start off a little bit rocky with Charlie telling his classmates that his dad is Santa Claus, and then and then Scott has to explain to the kids that he runs a toy store, so in a way he's kind of like Santa Claus. But then Charlie's like, no, but you really are, because we went to the North Pole and we met up with the elves and we met up with the reindeer. So then people are starting to think that there's something going on with Charlie, and that's when he gets visited by Neil, who's basically telling him that maybe Scott is like telling him all these stories so that, he can believe that he's Santa Claus when, that actually may or may not be true. And then as time goes on, that's when, Scott goes through this massive transformation, as we've been talking about throughout this podcast. So
the one thing one thing I'll say about the Santa's workshop scenes. I mean, like they were quite imaginative, and actually, dare I say, I think they actually were really well done, if I remember. So like,
oh yeah, for sure.
This is one of the better Santa's workshops, I have to say. That we've seen.
Yeah, we've seen some pretty bad ones.
Yeah, it's just kind of like they look so real. Yeah, some of the Santa's workshops have really done. I mean, like the one thing I will say that the Nightmare Before Christmas is actually up the ante. Like they gave him like his whole world that he had. Like if you remember,
exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, like there have been movies that up the ante. There have been movies that do Santa Claus and like do it pretty safely. But no, I think they took some risks in this. Like they have like the whole Santa's like room where like he has like his own private puppet show. Pretty much going
yeah,
non-stop.
and not only that, but they also have a mixture between, the reindeer and jet proportion. They also have Santa wearing like a fireproof suit. They also have some new additions into the sleigh, such as a radar, so that they can be able to point out what houses need to be delivered next. There's also a little microphone / walkie-talkie that's inside of the tip of Santa's hat. There's also a chocolate chip cookie and hot cocoa dispenser. So yeah, there's a lot of like really interesting tweaks that they did to the traditional interpretations of Santa's workshop.
Yeah, the Santa of the future.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so going into this, so I think that the transitioning from where Scott is into becoming Santa is actually pretty interesting. So, he starts off with the weight gain, and everybody's like pointing out, it's like, what happened to you, Scott? And, he's like, like saying, oh, I got stung by a bee and I was really allergic to it. And then he starts ordering nothing but sweets. He goes over to the doctor. The doctor says, no, you're healthy as a horse. You're perfectly fine. And then, he was checking his heartbeat, and it's actually, the heartbeat is beating to jingle bells. Then he starts growing a beard, and his hair starts going white. He even shaves it multiple times, but it grows back just as quickly. And he can't do anything about it because he's a new Santa. And then once he sees people like walking around down the street, he actually knows who each person is individually, whether they're naughty or nice, and what gift they want. And even there was a line of children who go up to him immediately saying, I want this toy, I want that toy for the holidays. And this is like really concerning over for Laura and Neil, saying that Scott is taking this way too far just for Charlie's sake.
Yeah, well, it's not his fault, is it? Like, he's just like, this is all happening to him, and
yeah, of course, this is all happening to him, but they don't know about the fact that Scott and Charlie went over to the North Pole and that he became the new Santa. Yeah. They just think that this is all just a ruse.
Yeah.
And it becomes so serious that Laura and Neil take Scott over to court, and he puts a restraining order on him.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is like, the one thing I'll say about this, I guess you could say Santa Claus, is that this is a really sympathetic character, because, like, he didn't ask to become Santa Claus, did he? Like, this has just happened to him. And
exactly. This was all a big accident. He just saw a guy up on his roof he thought he was going to be robbed, and then he said, "Hey, what are you doing up there?" Santa accidentally fell down, and then he just became the new Santa because he wore his coat. So this was all just a big accident and misunderstanding.
So, I mean, like, the one thing I'll say about it, and, I would say Tim Allen's performance, I think, in all this, I think, is really good. And that's,
Yeah.
he plays the guy, like, he plays this, like, he's supposed to be, like, this straight up, like, salesperson and things like that. Like, he's, like, he's trying to, like, stay as that, but, that Santa part of him is, like, obviously, he's still driving things in his head. And so, he's there in, the boardroom meeting actually is hilarious because, like,
Yeah, the boardroom meeting where they're trying to reinvent Santa Claus instead of like, oh, we're not giving him a sleigh, we're giving him a
well,
tank.
even before we get to that point, like, he pretty much like orders like the entire menu, and like just he's like the last one trying to like eat everything pretty much.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy, and then we get to Turbo Tank. Oh boy, Turbo Tank.
Oh my God. Like
Yeah.
seriously, this is like an action star's wet dream. It's like, okay, we have your Rambos, we have your Terminators, but what are we going to do about the holidays? Okay, let's make Santa into an action star by giving him a tank and giving him all this cool weapon so that we can make Santa cool for the kids.
Agree. This reminds me of like, what's that? What's that video game that Bart stole from like you remember in the episode where he like where Marge like backs away from him. And because obviously she thinks she's mothering him too much, and he ends up saying, "What's it called, Bone Storm, or something like that."
Yeah, something like
I think
that.
something like that. Yeah, and so it kind of reminds me of like the advert where like this muscle-bound Santa Claus comes like with a rocket launcher and like fires the game inside the game console.
I remember,
Yeah, I
yes.
remember that. Yeah, so like anything anyone else can do, the Simpsons could do better at that time, I have to say. But
I mean, of course it is. I mean, we're still talking about like the golden age of Simpsons because this came out in '95 and it was like season 7.
yeah,
So
exactly,
yeah,
yeah. So, but I mean, well, the Santa Claus came out in like 1994, pretty much. So like, yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
So
yeah.
I guess this is kind of like
This is in Simpsons Prime pretty much at this point. So
yeah, pretty much Simpsons Prime. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
So but yeah, I mean like Santa Claus or Scott Calvin, however you want to call him in this movie. I mean like he is a character you can really sympathize with. Like some dumb luck came around and he ended up being Santa and now he's stuck with it. And but the one thing I'll say about this is that he actually grows affectionate to who he is and everything like that. So like he starts to slowly realize how important actually he is to a lot of people, and that like and
Exactly. Like in the
it's not
beginning of
all
the
about
movie,
him.
yeah, exactly. In the beginning of the movie, that's all he cared about was, whatever toy came out, damned if it's good or not, and just making a whole bunch of money and being able to keep up with the sales. So, yeah, basically he has a change of heart and he's able to appreciate the fact that he has this new position of making millions of children happy. And it basically changes his ways as to how he sees toy making. I mean, I'm sure that if it was just regular Scott Calvin, he would have been perfectly okay with, having Santa in a tank and trying to appeal to kids because they would buy it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think what it says. So, like, the other characters, the one thing I'll say, though, is that, I mean, maybe a lot like, Unlikely Angel, unfortunately, like, Tim Allen is, like, is the center of, like, everything that is kind of going on, and all the, the craziness of the story kind of wraps around him, basically turning into Santa Claus, and unfortunately, I think, once again, I think, like Unlikely Angel, I think that goes to this movie's detriment, because we really don't really get to, like, focus on, like, everything else that's kind of, like, focus, going on around at the time. Believe me, there's important things really going on because obviously there's his relationship with his son, and there's the the fact that he's losing kind of like control of like his position within the company that he's supposed to be in, and now he's basically falling into like the Santa Claus, and that sort of wraps around him too. And then there's his relationship with his ex-wife as well, which obviously that again relies on him. So unfortunately, I think maybe this movie once again is another movie that's unfortunately centers around too much around our main character. Maybe.
And that's a similar complaint that we had with Mrs. Doubtfire and The Mask. That the main character is so good at what he does that all the other side characters suffer and they don't get as much development as the main character because the main character is so charismatic and they have this whole story that builds around to the point in which everybody else has to build around that main character.
Yeah, exactly. It makes me wonder if like Dolly Parton probably should have been in this movie. Maybe I don't know. Like,
Oh man, we have Dolly Parton as Mrs. Claus.
imagine that like the ultimate Christmas movie, kind of like Dolly Parton, Robin Williams, Tim Allen, like Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey.
Yeah, like it would have been stupidly expensive at the time, back in the '90s. But good grief, what a movie that probably would have been. You
That would
know,
have been really interesting, that's for sure.
yeah, definitely. So, but I mean, here's the thing about this. The Santa Claus definitely fits in as, it's probably not the best Christmas movie, but I mean, it definitely does get a play every single year, no doubt, without a doubt. People love this movie.
Yeah, people do love this movie, and people do have the nostalgia that it does get played every single year. And as we mentioned earlier, it's been so successful that it has two sequels and a mini series that literally just came out last month. So, yes, the Santa Claus has become that Christmas staple up there with movies such as It's a Wonderful Life, A Christmas Carol, A Christmas Story, Home Alone, and various others.
So, interesting notes about the home media, apparently. At one point of the film, in a brief exchange between Scott and Laura, it takes place between Laura hands Scott a piece of paper, which Neil's mother has phone number on it, and Scott says, 1-900 spank me, I know that number. And in the United States, the exchange was actually removed from all home media releases in the film, except for the VHS and laserdisc release.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I don't even remember that scene.
Yeah, and but apparently, because it's been removed from the releases, so actually it's interesting to see if it's in the Disney Plus release.
I
If
doubt it that it is because if it was released in 1994, they removed it in 1999. They probably do have the edited version.
Maybe. So, Almost Digital Downloads released in 1999, DVD release after 1996, in which a child from Silicon. The reason why it's been removed is because a child from Silicon, Washington, called the number, which turned out to be an actual working sex hotline number.
What?
And occurred a phone bill of $400.
Oh no, and that's in the 90s
Yeah,
too.
so
That's a lot of money.
that's an equivalent to $700 today.
No,
Oh,
no, no, no,
yeah.
no.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, the line is also removed from Disney Plus print, and also on television broadcast, the number is changed to 1-800-pound.
Oh yeah, sure. That's not doesn't have a sexual innuendo. 1-800-pound.
Honestly.
God.
So So unfortunately, there was some fallout from this movie, which was pretty unfortunate, I think, for some people who put their kids in front of it. But yeah. So
Kind of reminds me of the time in which in The Rescuers they had the scene that flew by really quickly when Bernard and Miss Bianca were flying over Orville. There's a scene in the back of the window of a naked woman, and in subsequent releases they have removed it from all the media, including Disney Plus.
spoil sports.
Anyway, so I guess at the end of the day, the Santa Claus. Yes, I can see why this has become a Christmas classic for a lot of people. I can see the people's opinions on why it's not that great. I can see people's opinions on why it's pretty good. I would say that it does have a mixture between like good and bad. I think that it does boil down to a fairly solid Christmas movie.
Interesting note, apparently, according to this. Why didn't the elves seem to care that the old Santa was dead? Well, apparently, according to this, if you pay close attention, you actually notice that the old Santa is actually waving to Scott when he picks up Santa's ID card and walks away. So, I didn't actually notice that, actually.
Me neither. What?
Yeah, really? I guess we'll have to watch that again and see if that's actually in there, true or not. So, it's apparently
I
that.
guess this is like one of those like blink and you miss it kind of situations.
You know what? I've got Disney Plus. So I might actually, after we've done this podcast, I might actually go and watch it again. Maybe see if
I'll
that's
have to watch
true.
it again too. Apparently.
Yeah. So, so apparently, there is a theory going around that the elves were aware that when they sent Santa off, that this was going to be like the last time they saw him. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, at the end of all of the movie, the Scott gets apprehended by the police, but Charlie and the four elves, with an attitude, break him out. Scott then returns Charlie to his mom and Neil. Laura begins to believe that Scott is really Santa, but Neil is still skeptical. Not even Bernard the elf shows up, lets Neil go, claiming that Scott is delusional. As a Christmas gift to Scott, Laura burns the custody papers, and Santa takes off to make his rounds, dropping presents for Laura, Neil, and Charlie flies off. Neil receives let's get my wiener whistle, and Laura gets her long overdue wish of a mystery date game. Not more than 10 minutes later, Charlie shakes his magic snowballs, and Santa returns, even though he was on his way to Cleveland. By now, Laura and Neil both believe that Scott is really Santa, and Laura allows Charlie to go along for the ride. So as long as that Santa doesn't take Charlie over any oceans.
Which, yeah, that's not going to happen. He is going to go over multiple oceans.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can get away from going back and forth between the North Pole and to the continents. I don't know. So.
I mean, how is he going to be able to get to places such as, I don't know, like any of the Asian countries or any of the European countries without crossing an ocean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe. Well, keep in mind, the North Pole is frozen, frozen on top. So, I mean, technically saying he probably is going over an ocean, I guess. But I mean, anyway, it's the Santa Claus. Why are we thinking too hardly into this? I don't know.
Exactly. What about the tropical islands, Aaron?
Anyway. Shall we rate this movie then? And
yes, let's rate it.
Send everyone on their way. So, I mean, here's the thing about this. This movie is still beloved by a lot of people for good reason. We have a character that we can really follow, and by the way, even though some of the cast can be kind of forgettable at times, the minute you turn the Santa Claus back on, I mean, you still, you can fall in love with Bernard. I mean, you can still get some laughs out of Neil. You can still get, laugh at how Laura can't believe anything that's going on, and you can still get these sweetness of Charlie as well. So, there is something here for a Christmas movie, but the thing I guess you could say is that, unfortunately, it's maybe if you don't like Tim Allen, you're going to have a problem with this movie because you're going to be spending a lot of time with Tim Allen, whether you like it or not. So that's the thing. So I mean, I guess I would say it's a 7.5. I guess if I had to say
the same thing, a 7.5.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid average Christmas movie, and but with some people who actually do feel it's beloved.
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely in the middle of the great Christmas classics. It's not way, way on top like It's a Wonderful Life or A Christmas Carol. So, I mean, I would say that it is still a pretty decent watch. I mean, if you are going to make a Christmas list that you're going to put down, okay, what are the Christmas movies I'm going to be watching throughout this season? I would probably say that you can add it in there, but if you would probably omit that, then I wouldn't think of it as a major loss.
Yeah, I mean, I would safely say that if you had a collection of Christmas VHS tapes at the time, I guarantee the Santa Claus would probably be in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I hope you've all enjoyed our Christmas, and this won't be the last time you see In Search of the Crystal Skull. We'll have some more In Search of the Crystal Skull, by the way. Because, by the way, we haven't found that Crystal Skull yet, so we'll have to...
nope, we're still looking for it.
Yeah. But until then, everybody, continue enjoying our adventures very soon. Take care, and bye-bye for now.
See you later.